When I was 10, my family moved to a small rural town in upstate New York. Our new house was surrounded by thick woods, and at the edge of the property stood an old treehouse nestled in a massive oak tree. It was weathered, the paint peeling, but to a kid it was magical, a hideout to call my own. My parents told me the previous owners had built it for their son, who tragically passed away years earlier. They didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. At the time, it just seemed like a sad story. On my first trip up the rickety ladder, I found a few remnants of the past. A dusty old journal, a couple of toy soldiers, and a tin box full of marbles. The journal caught my attention. Inside, a boy named Danny had scribbled entries about how he loved the treehouse, how it was his escape. But near the end of the journal, the tone changed. The writing became erratic, with sentences like, "It doesn't like me anymore," and "I heard it whisper my name." The last page simply read, "Don't come back." I laughed it off, thinking it was just a kid's imagination running wild. Over the next few weeks, the treehouse became my favorite place to hang out. I'd climb up after school with snacks, books, and sometimes my flashlight if I planned to stay after sunset. At first, everything was fine, peaceful even, but then things started to change. One night, as I sat reading in the treehouse, I heard a faint scraping noise from outside. I froze, holding my breath, and listened. The sound was rhythmic, like nails on bark. I peeked out the small window, but saw nothing. Figuring it was just an animal, I shrugged it off and climbed down for the night. The next day, I noticed deep gouges in the tree trunk, right below the treehouse. They looked like claw marks, long and deliberate. My dad brushed it off, saying it was probably a raccoon. Still, a shiver ran down my spine every time I climbed the ladder after that. As the weeks passed, the weirdness escalated. Objects I left in the treehouse would be moved or disappear entirely. The flashlight I kept there vanished one night, only to turn up a week later under my bed. The ladder creaked at odd times when no one was climbing it. And then, the whispers started. Late one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard it, a soft, childlike voice calling my name. "Ryan!" The sound came from the woods below. I leaned out the treehouse window, expecting to see one of the neighborhood kids playing a prank. But the woods were empty, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. The whispers continued over the next few nights, always faint, always just outside the treehouse. They would call my name, or sometimes they'd laugh, a hollow, echoing sound that made my skin crawl. I stopped going to the treehouse after dark, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. One afternoon, I found the journal back on the floor of the treehouse. I'd left it at home on my bookshelf, but here it was, open to the last page. The message, "Don't come back," was scribbled over and over again, filling the entire page. My heart pounded as I climbed down and sprinted back to the house, the journal clutched in my hand. That night, I woke to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. I didn't want to look, but something compelled me. Standing outside was a figure, small, childlike. Its face was pale, its eyes hollow and dark. It lifted a hand and waved, then pointed toward the treehouse. I couldn't move, frozen in terror, as the figure slowly faded into the night. The next morning, I begged my parents to tear the treehouse down. They laughed, thinking I'd had a bad dream, but I refused to set foot in it ever again. A few weeks later, a lightning storm took care of it for me. A bolt struck the oak, splintering the tree and demolishing the treehouse in the process. To this day, I don't know what haunted that treehouse, whether it was Danny's ghost or something darker. All I know is that I still hear the whispers sometimes, soft and faint, calling my name when I'm alone. When I was a kid, the treehouse in our backyard was my sanctuary. My dad had built it years ago, a sturdy structure nestled high in the old oak tree. It was my escape, a place where I could dream, read, and let my imagination run wild. But one summer, that treehouse became the site of something I'll never forget. It started innocently enough. I'd climb up the wooden ladder after dinner and sit by the little window, watching the fireflies blink in the dusk. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I thought I heard a faint whisper. At first, I dismissed it as the rustling of leaves in the wind. But the sound persisted, growing clearer with each passing night. "Come play." The voice was soft, barely audible, but it was there. It always came from the corner of the treehouse where the shadows were darkest. I told my parents about it, but they laughed it off. "Treehouses make all kinds of noises," Dad said with a grin, but it didn't feel like just a noise. It felt personal. Determined to prove it was nothing, I decided to stay up late one night with a flashlight. Armed with a book to keep me occupied, I sat on the wooden floor and waited. For hours, the treehouse was silent except for the occasional creak of the boards. Just when I was about to give up, I heard it again. "Come play with us." This time the voice was clearer, more insistent. My flashlight flicked to the corner, but nothing was there. My chest tightened as I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. But then I felt something. Light, almost imperceptible. A tap on my shoulder. I spun around, and the flashlight beam swept across the room. For a split second, I saw something. A pair of small handprints on the dusty floorboards, faint but unmistakable. My breath hitched. The handprints weren't mine. The next day, I asked my dad about the treehouse's history. He seemed hesitant, then finally admitted something he hadn't told me before. "The oak's been here longer than the house. The neighbors used to say a pair of siblings lived in the treehouse before the old owners moved away. But they, passed on, I think. A fire or something tragic like that." I felt a cold chill race down my spine. That night, I decided I wasn't going back up there. I locked the treehouse door from the outside, leaving it to the whispers and whatever else might still linger in the shadows. Over the years, the treehouse grew weathered and abandoned, the whispers fading with the wind. But every so often, when I walk by that old oak, I swear I still feel eyes watching me, waiting for someone to play. It was the summer of 1998 when my cousin Ben and I decided to explore the old treehouse at the edge of our grandparents' property. The treehouse had always been off limits. Grandpa warned us it wasn't safe, claiming the wooden planks were rotting and the ladder unstable. But curiosity is a dangerous thing for kids, and we were determined to see it for ourselves. The treehouse stood in an ancient oak that loomed like a sentinel at the edge of the woods. Its weathered planks and tilted roof seemed out of place against the lively green backdrop. As we approached, a chill settled over us, and the air grew oddly still. The usual hum of crickets and rustle of leaves vanished as if the world were holding its breath. The ladder creaked ominously under our weight as we climbed up, each step making me question whether this was a good idea. But once we reached the top, it was like stepping into another world. The interior was littered with old toys, dusty books, and scraps of paper covered in childish drawings. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, some familiar, others alien. The most peculiar thing was the faint sound of whispering, like a distant conversation, though no one else was around. "Do you hear that?" Ben asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, straining to understand the words. It sounded like multiple voices, hushed and overlapping. The whispers seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. Ben, ever the brave one, found a loose plank and pried it up with a rusty screwdriver he found. Beneath the floor was a small, hidden compartment containing a tin box. Inside were photographs, black and white snapshots of children, their faces solemn, their eyes wide with something I could only describe as fear. On the back of each photo was a name and a date, all from decades ago. "That's weird," Ben muttered, flipping through the photos. Then he froze, staring at one of them. He slowly turned it around to show me. The child in the photo had Ben's name scrawled on the back, along with a date, tomorrow's date. We both jumped as the whispers grew louder, almost urgent now. The air in the treehouse felt suffocating, as though something unseen was pressing down on us. Suddenly, the whole structure groaned, the walls creaking as if the treehouse itself were alive. "We need to go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ben didn't argue. We scrambled down the ladder as fast as we could, nearly falling in our haste. As soon as our feet hit the ground, the whispers stopped, replaced by an unnatural silence. We bolted back to the house without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to make sense of what we had found. In the morning, I woke to the sound of a commotion outside. My parents and grandparents were standing by the treehouse, staring at it in disbelief. The entire structure had collapsed overnight, as if the tree had rejected it. We never spoke about it again. Ben and I never ventured near that treehouse, or what remained of it after that summer. But sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear those whispers calling to us, beckoning us back to the tree.